All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to week 2 of Hackfest 2021. As you might know, Hackfest is our biggest annual event. We usually hold events twice a week, but in October we hold Hackfest, which is our biggest event. And today we have 3 amazing speakers. We have Matt Swish, we have Malusi Mwangeli, and we have CK or Crispus Kamau. And so we're going to begin with our keynote, which is by Matt Swish. He is our partner and friend at She Hacks Kenya. He is also the founder at Opcode and Comai Technologies. Matt, take it away.
Okay, perfect. Can everyone see me and hear me okay?
I can. Maybe just housekeeping. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. Make it as interactive as possible. We've muted everyone just to keep things organized, but you can post it in a chat or you can raise your hands. Yeah, Matt, welcome.
Okay, perfect. And okay, perfect. Cool. Well, thanks for the introduction. And so my name is Matt. I'm the founder of a small cybersecurity startup called Comai Technology. I'm based in Dubai, so that's why I had the chance to come to Kenya a few times in the past. So I don't know if we have met before, but if we haven't, I'm probably gonna come back soon anyway. And yeah, I've been a big fan of She Hacks since the beginning. I also have a conference / organization called Opcode that's mostly focusing on like most of conferences, like sharing knowledge and building communities like around the world. And we also have a Discord server, which is which has around 900 members now. Just recruited the moderator to animate the server. So even if you want to stay in touch after, so you can always reach out to me on Twitter. My Twitter ID should be at the bottom, or just join the Discord server. And to find the link to the Discord server, just go on my Twitter. You should find the link in the bio. So for today's keynote, and because I'm a bit lazy, I didn't make any slides, but since it's a bit interactive, that should be okay. But today's topic, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the landscape of cybersecurity with the NFT world, because that's something that really got my attention over the past 2 months, mostly because of my friend Johnny, who has been pretty heavy into the NFT scene. And this year, I kind of looked at it at the beginning of the year when people were talking about it, but I just stopped looking at it. It was just a bit of a burnout with work. I was like, whatever, I'm just gonna focus on what I have to do and look at that later if I have to. And the last time I looked at Ethereum or anything like blockchain related was in 2017, when I gave a presentation at DevCon where I was presenting the first decompiler for Ethereum smart contract. So if you're not familiar with NFTs and smart contract, so you have the blockchain thingy, like the distributed ledger, blah, blah. And you can have on top of the data a software layer, which is basically the smart contract, and smart contract get executed by the Ethereum virtual machine. At least in the case of Ethereum, each blockchain like Solana, etc., Tezos they all have their own architecture, but we're just gonna talk about Ethereum for the sake of the example here. And smart contract, just like an executable, just that's running on your disk, is composed of a set of instructions, so which was usually called the bytecode. And you don't always have the source code at the beginning, but no, if you go an Etherscan, 99% of the time you're gonna get the source code, and so those contracts can be verified. But if you want to do mass scanning of smart contract, having a disassembler / decompiler or anything that allows you to do dynamic analysis on like thousands of smart contracts on the blockchain is pretty useful, because especially back then in 2017, we were talking about like many type of bugs, like re-entry type of bugs, etc., etc. It was a bit before like framework like Open Zeppelin were established. And just checking the chat here. Okay, should see it. And back then, people were making still trying out how to write smart contracts, you know. So people were making a lot of mistakes. So you could just like scan smart contracts for vulnerabilities. Now you will still find kind of like vulnerabilities, but it's not as common. Also, like the number of smart contracts has been going up a lot. And the other thing too is you kind of have like more like logic bugs, you know, like if you can mint a project like before everyone, I'm going to explain after what's minting. Those are like the type of thing you kind of want to exploit. So those are like, that's for the smart contracts. Then NFTs are basically sitting on top of that. You need to create an ERC 721 smart contract, which is going to be representing your NFTs. You know, if you use like smart contract, you can also do it just by using regular like platform like OpenSea. Coinbase just made an announcement this week that they're going to have their own platform. Binance also this week. So this week is a pretty busy week for like the NFT and crypto community. So everyone is having their own platform, but at the end of the day, it's like running like smart contract in the backend. So if you're an independent artist, you can just upload an image or video or anything, any type of art, and put it for sale, kind of like an eBay type of auction, or like the set price. Except that unlike eBay, you can see that smart contract layer for like certain projects. So you have projects that are going to generate, let's say, like 10,000 unique like images, for instance, and each image is going to have various different traits. And based on the scarcity of the art which is which is available to the public for sale or minting, the price of that art piece is going to differ. Also based on other variables, like how big is the community, what about the team, what's the roadmap, is there utility beyond like the JPEG, or is it just a JPEG? So those are also other variables, but basically you have a whole market, which is not very new, because like NFTs have been existing for a while, but like since the beginning of 2021, they are becoming a more like serious alternative asset class for retail investors, but also for like institutional investors. We have seen like companies like Visa buying like a CryptoPunk, etc., which is worth like a few $1 million. So back to Sami, Yahi, you forgot to put a t-shirt. How do I turn off his video? It's like
let me do that.
It's like all show Sami, like this is not OnlyFans. It's like he's just chilling like topless, putting the video. Oh, man, like you guys are killing me. Anyway, so they're like alternative like asset class, and you can have like marketplace where people can buy and sell or bid and have auctions. But the main difference and what we see, so there's like few things, like so it's called like dynamic. So like the whole like smart contract thing, especially around like NFTs, you know, like finding utilities for them, it's kind of a big question mark at the moment. People are still like thinking about the question, how to use like Web3, how to use like dynamic application like this. Twitter, I think earlier this month, has been talking about using NFTs as a way to verify your profile. So if you would connect your wallet or etc. And I think that's kind of where it's becoming interesting, because so there are an alternative asset class which is based on software, and which can have like unique attributes. And that asset class can be sold just like you would do it with cryptocurrency on those like specific marketplace, like OpenSea. You know, you have like I was saying, you have like the Coinbase one, Binance is opening one, so you can have more and more marketplace. But the main difference with regular cryptocurrency, etc., is people usually tend to enjoy displaying the NFTs they have. You know, like there's like multiple jokes saying that, well, jokes kind of also like philosophy around it, saying that now with NFTs, you know, communities are building brands. So to know if you belong to like a specific tribe, etc., people would like recognize you based on your like a profile picture. For instance, my Twitter profile picture is a cool cat. That's the one you can see like here. And that's another like example of NFT, which is like a mutant ape, which is a derivative of like the bored apes. So you can see what people have based on their social media account, and people tend to be like very active on social media. And they are active mostly because that helps building the brand of the community they are supporting. But if you have a security mindset, it also makes them like targets, because you can, instead of just saying like, oh, who is who, you can tell who has what. And you can define people based on what they have. And if you're an attacker, like we have seen like multiple times, like I often take the example of North Korea, because they are the one who have been the most active in the cryptocurrency space, because they have been like targeting multiple exchanges over the past years, on top of the regular like central banks, etc., even like in Bangladesh, even in Africa, etc. But they also have been targeting crypto exchanges. And at the beginning of the year, we heard of a story of like some alleged North Korean researchers targeting security researchers on social media by sending them link on Twitter, like having an actual discussion, you know, like using some social engineering, connecting with people on Discord, on Telegram, sending them like working exploits and claiming they need some help. But the Visual Studio like project would, if you would like try to compile, would execute like command before kind of like macros in Microsoft Office documents. So if you're not opening this in a virtual machine, you know, it would just like install like some malware on your machine. But also what they also did is also to send like links to like their blog, where they had some technical blog post, very new, fresh blog, and like technical content, very interesting, very targeted towards the cybersecurity community. And some of those blog posts, under certain condition, would display an actual Chrome zero-day exploit. So the thing is, to buy and sell NFTs, like what happens is, the way it works most of the time is, you have your wallet, which is not like on Binance or like those centralized like exchanges. You have like a MetaMask wallet, and MetaMask also, like you have like on Tezos like Kukai, on Solana you have Phantom. So all those wallets for like all those platforms are basically like Chrome extensions. So if you would pound someone with like a Chrome exploit, like RC, like LP, Sandbox Escape, etc., you would definitely be able to have access to like those Chrome extensions. So in theory, you could like steal like the private key directly from it, I guess. But also, if you have access to the machine, you can also like get access to like whatever stuff they're writing down, right? And just like sell yourself or transfer yourself some of the actual NFTs and resell them like separately, or like, you know, if you put like some bid, make it accept, etc. So there is a whole way, and like I think, you know, like the price, like according to the Zerodium price table for like Chrome RC with an LP is like $650,000. So it's definitely like something that not some random dude will start doing to like target people, because that requires a lot of efforts to just like even build like a Chrome exploit. And if you want to buy one, like it's definitely like pretty expensive. But you could monetize it like pretty quickly, given the fact that like you have like a bunch of NFTs like Bored Apes, CryptoPunks that can be worth like a few $1 million like easily. And then like just like monetize it like this. So there's like few stories like that happen. Like, I mean, so I didn't prepare any slides, but there's a bunch of like stories that are like worth looking at. So this one is an example, that's one of the CryptoPunk was being hacked. So there's like a bunch of things that you can also look at. On how it was done, like for like transactions. Another thing that also happened is if you can have access to like whitelist of some projects, well, you can mint. Mint means like usually that's the primary sale of an item for collection. So you get like the cheapest price possible. So if you can mint, usually you get the advantage of buying an NFT at the base price, then you can like flip it. So that's also like something that can be done. People have been using like various different techniques because some projects are not using like a whitelist system, or they don't even check like how many items you can mint. So like within the same wallet. So it was like really easy. I mean, it could be bypassed by having like, like multiple wallets and just scripting everything, but still, like in some cases it was very basic, and like those mistakes basically like kind of ruin certain projects. Like if you look at projects like Gvol, for instance, which is this one. So like that project, for instance, like you could like mint as many as you can, and I think like 2 or 3 people like had most of it, because they had a bot that was like minting everything in front of everyone. And then you have like some parameters where like you can just like outbid people like on gas wars, and then like the whole project kind of falls down, because those people who have like so many of those items just like like flood the market with them and just like dilute the project value. In some other case, with like there's another project called like Seven also, where what one of the person did is they used like the hidden network to reserve an entire block. So it costed them, I forgot how many ether, but quite a substantial like amount of money, and like 7 like ether per transaction, just to like beat everyone on the gas war. And on top of that, they also wrote their own smart contract that they deployed on the actual like Ethereum mainnet. And that smart contract was basically minting the project from the smart contract itself, like minting it from your wallet. So they had like a massive like competitive advantage in terms of like front running everyone. So there's a bunch of things happening where like projects both have to be careful of how they design their smart contracts to avoid, like people to take advantage of the actual like minting process, but also how like on both sides, basically. Like if you are a project, you don't want people to actually like mint very easily and just like, like, because you want to have like enough diversity within your community members. And the second thing is also like your server side, because like a lot of the time, like in your smart contracts, you can have like some APIs pointing down, pointing to your like server API, where you can have like all your metadata like stored for like your NFT. So you could change that. Like if you get access to a server, and the other thing is if you're a user, an actual like collector. So unlike traditional art where you have insurance, you can like safely store something It's basically be on your computer, and some people, they use their phone, they use their laptop. There's no segregation between like the different machines. They're gonna use like just kind of like in enterprise where you see like people doing like the bring your own device in companies. Where people would not segregate anything and they would just like walk, do the personal stuff, like buy the NFTs on it, like, like just click on every link they would see on Twitter. And if you would see a scenario like what we saw, we targeting like security researchers at the beginning of the year, well, that's becoming quite problematic because like 99% of the people in the NFT securities probably don't know what an exploit is or 0-day is. And if you're an attacker, it would definitely work to your advantage. So that's one thing. There are like few stories if you check online, like after the talk, would suggest you like to just look for like NFT hack or well, for like NFT being stolen. You're gonna see a bunch of like Twitter threads, where people don't understand what's happening. Because you have like the basic like phishing, which is like the one people are aware of. You receive a fake email saying, oh, like someone placed a bid on you, and usually they would be quite targeted based on the owner. And then you would have like a fake like OpenSea website. Like I received like some link like this, but like the domain name would be like a different one, like LC instead of IO. And the page would be like looking the same. So if you connect by mistake, they would definitely have access to it. And even OpenSea, they only recently hired the head of security and security people, like only like a few weeks ago. I think, well, I don't even know if they found someone, but they were just posting about hiring someone like just 2-3 weeks ago. So there's definitely things to be looked at there. And like most of projects, when people like end up writing things like very quickly, there's like mistakes. So this is a very, very new field, but the difference with other projects is there is actually like digital assets that are like worth something. Was before, if a website would be hacked or anything, like, or database would be like hacked, it would mostly be like private information. Whereas like now, well, it's decentralized, etc. Like unless you use like cold storage, etc. But a lot of people still use like a hot wallet, and you can access to some people's assets. So I can see one question here from Eve. Earlier you mentioned MetaMask. How can secret phrases for wallet be stored correctly and securely? Well, you need a good a secret phrase first of all when you connect to your wallet, but it depends on some scenarios, because if someone is gonna like look at you and target you, like if they manage to install an exploit or anything, in that case they can just have like a keylogger and get your passphrase anyway of your MetaMask wallet, right? So then how good your passphrase is does not really matter, so that's one thing to be conscious about. The best way I would say is like to be aware if you're a potential target. I mean, like there are people, that have like 9 Bored Apes, and they just like, because there's so like a friend was just posting like a tweet saying, oh, I just bought a new Bored Ape, and now he has like this like a collection of like 9 Bored Apes. And actually, like that's cool, but like the floor of a Bored Ape is like 40 Ether, which I don't even know how much is that anymore. It's like like 40 Ether, so it's like $140,000. So imagine there's like 9 of them. That definitely like makes you like a pretty significant target. So like more than minimum $1.2 million of like NFTs. So based on that, you definitely have to, the best ways for like your valuable NFTs to use like cold storage, obviously, to like transfer your NFTs there. So, like they're not on your MetaMask wallet. But whenever you start to do sales, etc., there's always a moment where they're gonna be in your hot wallet. So, and now that they're getting more and more attention from the public, we had the Christie's and the Sotheby's auction happening. So there is more and more mainstream people happening. More and more mainstream people looking at NFTs now. So, and most of the time they're not necessarily the most technical users either. So the bar of security should be easy and accessible for a lot of those people, especially if they're gonna start to store money more and more, just with your regular crypto wallet. But with MetaMask, it's not even when you're on your Binance account where you have two-factor authentication, etc. Well, if you use MetaMask, Kukai, or what's the name, Phantom, well, there's no two-factor authentication. It's just one passphrase. So that's also one thing, because with email security, we saw it with Gmail, as soon as two-factor authentication was being implemented, that made things way more complicated to hack, because you were required to have an authentication code for the two-factor authentication. Whereas with MetaMask and all those things, you are kind of back to the old days of passwords, where you don't have two-factor authentications also. So let's see what is going to look like with Coinbase and Binance, but then it's going to go back to being centralized anyway, which may be the best route for security, but this we would not know yet. So yeah, so as you all know, there's no correct way of doing things 100% securely and safe in a safe manner. So it's more about I think we're gonna see people being more and more creative around that, because there's a lot of money on the table. If I had an answer for all the issues around the NFTs or anything, I would definitely share all of them. But it's so new and early, and that's kind of so far it's the first time ever I see so many people who are not geeks and IT people kind of looking into it, because it's also seen as an alternative investment class, a new type of asset that it's attracting all sorts of people into it. That it is quite interesting. But I mean, anyone with a Chrome 0-day now, they could target everyone in the NFT world, which is how would you monetize some exploits, with if you have a Chrome exploit, that's a pretty clear way of monetizing it. If you are some government the North Korean one, just targeting exchanges and stuff. So I'm pretty positive they're gonna do it. I have high suspicions that they started to do it already, but at the same time, I don't have any proof, because I don't have enough data, and it's hard to get telemetry, and obviously people who get their stuff stolen, at that point, you get so depressed, because there's this weird thing also in the NFT world where you get also emotionally attached to your NFTs. So whenever someone is taking it away from you, you're kind of I guess you're kind of grieving. But at the same time, you're also losing something that has a lot of value, that it was kind of reflecting your statue in the NFT community, plus that had monetary value. So it's if you manage to have a watch, and then people steal it, but that watch would be worth a really, really lot of lot of money. So yeah, So yeah, that's pretty much it for for my talk. So if you have any questions, you can just ask them in the chat, and yeah, either in the chat or in vocal. Does anyone have any NFTs in the chat?
If you have any questions, I know we have muted anyone who is not a co-host. Just go to the reactions and raise your hand. You'll find that option there, or you can post it in the chat.
Maybe Matt, one from me.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any maybe security risks with the block confirmations, especially for Ethereum when you're purchasing them or things like that?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Any security risk with block confirmations, especially for Ethereum?
If there's any security group that I would recommend?
Yes.
Good question. So I mean, as you know, every time someone is asking me for recommendation, I always say something related to software engineering. So there's one group with Ethereum that I really like, is the group doing the Rust implementation of Ethereum. They have a group on Telegram. The people are really smart. The lead developer is from an organization called Paradigm. And Paradigm has been doing a lot of really cool stuff. They have a really good podcast. Actually, they do have a very nice podcast, which is, I'll show you now. It's one of the best podcasts I've heard recently, to be honest. I'm gonna paste the link here and show you the page now. So that's, yeah, this one, Uncommon Core. So if you listen to that interview, with MEV Senpai, so MEV is maximum extracted value. So that's people who are hardcore software engineers, finding logic flows in smart contracts. And where's the chat? Oh, I don't know where the chat is. But yeah, so that one is pretty good. It's a really, really, really good one. And I've been liking it a lot. So it's definitely a pretty good way of being introduced to just send a quick message. No, yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I just sent the link in the chat. So that one is a pretty good podcast. A lot of those people, you would get a lot of good alpha, like they say, or valuable information. They spoke about Solana. So in Solana, you can have smart contract in Rust. Tezos also is another one which is pretty interesting. But yeah, learning smart contracts is pretty easy. You have this thing called Hard Hat, Hard Hat tutorial. Just go there. They can teach you how to do smart contracts, testing them. So it's just you can test them with just some basic Node.js code. It is very very straightforward. And there is also another website called and that one also is good, Solidity example, because they would talk about some of the hacks, that you can do. Pretty good examples. Let me post it in the chat also. So that's definitely a pretty good one. And yeah, they explain the different concepts. A lot of those things, actually, you can just go on YouTube also, and you find so many resources, which is one of the interesting thing I find now. If you want to learn software engineering or anything in that space, it's on YouTube. You have a lot of resources, especially for the past I would say the past 3 years. The amount of good quality content on YouTube has been increasing a lot. So yeah. I assume they probably have they have a CTF here. So you updated 5 days ago, super recent. Security, they have a playlist here. So yeah, simulate mainnet transactions. Yeah. So yeah, that website is also like pretty good. And yeah. Any more questions?
Any more questions? You can just raise your hand or post it in the chat. In the meantime, if you think of any questions after the sessions, you can always join the Discord. Is it OpCode, the OpCode Discord? It's
on the top.
Yeah, it's up there at top right. You can also follow OpCode on Twitter and also Matt Swish on Twitter. Swish, I think.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
And here I think you have the link to the Discord. Yeah, here. So yeah, you should have the Discord link here. Oops. Oh. I guess I messed up with the link. I guess you just have to go on the OpCode website then. If you go on the OpCode one, you have like the link here. And that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And we also have our She Hacks channel on that Discord server, right?
I'm just waiting for you to be more active on it. Like the
Yes.
whole WhatsApp thing needs to stop. WhatsApp is dying. Like it was gone for like 6-7 hours the other day. It's like everyone moved to like Signal and Telegram like 5 years ago.
Yeah, so She Hacks members you have had both
I know you have
men
more
and
like She
women.
Hacks members than do have OpCode members, so I'm counting on you
Yeah.
to like to carry the wagon.
Yeah, you can always join the Discord channel and we can carry the conversation there. Of course, we are just waiting for you guys to join and be active. I know we also have Telegram. And yeah, we are moving from WhatsApp. Eventually, we'll just have to move.
Just close it.
Yes.
Tell people to join Discord, and if they do not join, it's a conscious choice they're doing by ignoring new opportunities, because like there's so much resources on Discord, to be honest. And you know, like you can share like videos and stuff more easily. For like big communities, it's good.
For sure. So yes, you've heard, guys. Matt has posted the Discord, the link on the chat. Go join right now as this session is ongoing. But thank you so much, Matt. This is, of course, week 2 of Hackfest, and it's She Hacks OpCode collaboration, and we're so grateful to have you as our keynote speaker. I'm sure you'll get questions after the session, but we're always grateful to have you here with us, Matt. Thank you.
Well, I'm very happy to join. So this is the here this way. That's the Discord. That's what it looks like. So there's the She Hacks channel that you guys can join. But yeah, thanks again for having me as a guest again. And yeah, let's do something on Twitter Space whenever you have time. Let's see like who's gonna join and stuff. We can probably put a bunch of people. Like I'm sure we can find some interesting topic to talk about, like communities or something.
Yeah, that's a plan. Yeah, so thank you, Matt. Next, we're going to have our second session for the day. And this session is by Malusi Mungeli, who is a cybersecurity researcher at ICRAL Innovation Hub. Malusi is also a red teamer with particular focus on offensive infrastructure. And I'm sure most of you, or some of you, have read her blog post. So you can, we're going to post the link to her blog. And yeah, you can always go to the blog and enjoy some really cool posts. Malusi, welcome.
Hi, Laura. How are you?
I'm good.
Thank you for having me. First of all, this is an honor to be here. Yeah, so let's do this. Thank you so much, Matt, for your session. I didn't know much about NFTs, so like now I'm feeling like I need to get one. So yeah, let's do this. I'm going to share my screen. You can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, let me close. Yeah, okay, so let's start. So today I'm going to do a presentation on phishing, which is something I'm actually passionate and excited about. So I got this title from the song "I Will Make You Fishers of Men." I'm sure most of us know that song from Sunday school and the things we did when we were going to church. So it's essentially a session on advanced phishing techniques that go beyond user awareness. So as a red teamer or as a pen tester, how do you ensure that your fish gets delivered to whoever it needs to get delivered, and how do you ensure that you get the results that you need to get? So first of all, like Laura mentioned, my name is Malusi Faith or Malusi Mongeli, whichever one fancies you. I'm a cybersecurity researcher, analyst at ICRA, and I've been there for about 2 or 3 years. I'm also a cybersecurity trainer with Cisco, with Commonwealth of Learning, and with Think Cyber Africa. I center a lot around offensive infrastructure, so that's phishing, that's developing the attack infrastructure itself, and also phishing itself as an activity. So which is what we're going to be talking about most of this presentation. So that's my Twitter handle, Sneezy Ladybug, and my blog, as Laura has mentioned. Most of you have seen it before. Yeah, so this is what we're going to be covering, I think, in the next 40 minutes or to 1 hour. So one, we're going to look at the current state of phishing, what is happening around phishing in the cyberspace, how our attackers going about it, how our defenders going about it, and how far so far with phishing since it began in the 90s. And then because we're going to be dealing a lot with email phishing, we are going to have a small primer on SMTP. Then we're going to have a step-by-step scenario breakdown of a typical phishing campaign. And then finally, I'm going to share some tips and tricks that I have learned from as an experienced person, quote unquote. Yeah. Where is my? Yes. Okay. So the current state of phishing. So where are we, or how far so far are we with phishing itself? So first of all, what is phishing? I'm sure most of us know what phishing is. So phishing is a type of social engineering attack where an attacker will send a fraudulent message to try and trick someone into doing something. So phishing is essentially a blanket term. So you can do email phishing, SMS phishing, website phishing, video voice phishing. But for the purposes of this presentation, we will stick to email phishing. So phishing can be targeted, so it can be sent to one individual, so that's spear phishing, or an individual of high value, for example, a CEO, so that's what is called whaling. Or it can be sent en masse to many people in bulk, which is what you see a lot and which is what we're going to focus on in this presentation. So why do attackers fish? What is the motivation that attackers have for phishing? So there are 3 primary reasons why attackers fish or send phishing campaigns. First of all, they want to steal your credentials. So credentials could be login credentials, session tokens for maybe a service, or even credit card details so that they can steal your money or commit credit card fraud. Okay, so credential phishing attempts to harvest credentials for online services, which can then be maliciously accessed. So it can be a direct source of information. So if someone has credentials to your webmail, they can steal a lot of your data or money if they have access to your credit card details. So a common phishing scenario is an email which will pretend to tell you that there's unusual activity in your webmail or in your Gmail, and you need to sign in again in order to reset. So that's a really common way for people to steal your credentials. So another motivation for attackers to phish is to coerce you into doing something, which is something you see a lot in business email compromise. So this scenario usually relies on tricking a target into providing information that in of itself is valuable, or for the target to commit commit or to perform an action that is important or valuable. So an example would be an email that comes from the CEO or is spoofed from the CEO asking an employee, for example, to send an obscene amount of money to an offshore account. So you see that a lot in business email compromise. Yeah, so the final reason why attackers phish, and this is probably the most popular one, is to gain access into a host system. So a host system could be your device, your PC. So this usually relies on unpatched machines or an OD vulnerability that attackers have found. So they'll lure you into probably downloading an attachment or clicking a link, which will then remotely download malware onto your device. Once that malware launches, they have access to your system through a C2 or command and control center. So those are the primary reasons why attackers would phish. And for the sake of this presentation, we'll just think about credential harvesting and exploit phishing, which is trying to gain access into a host system. So the reason why phishing is effective as it is because of a couple of things that we're going to talk about in the next couple of slides. So according to a report that was done by the Cyber Defense magazine, about 91% of all cyber attacks start from a phishing email. So phishing is a very successful or prevalent technique for initial access into any network or into any device. Because if 91% of cyber attacks start from a phishing email, then that means it almost always works. Then on average, 30% of all phishing emails are opened by the intended targets or recipients. And out of those 30%, 12 of them will click on a malicious link or open attachments within those phishing emails. So contextually, if we had our target had 100 employees and we sent a phishing blast to those employees to try and figure out, whether or not user awareness works. If 30%, 30% would be if 30 people opened and 12 clicked, then statistically this shows phishing is one of the most successful and effective techniques or initial access vectors available to cyber attackers. Other initial access vectors tend to be a lot harder and tend to rely on stuff like ODs, which requires like a lot of research. So for people who are starting out, or for even people who are established in the industry, phishing almost always works in terms of trying to get an initial access vector into a network or into a device. So as we've talked about, we've seen that cyber attacks almost always rely on phishing as the initial access vector. And recently we have seen record numbers all over Africa for phishing attacks and the amount of money we lose to cyber fraud and theft. So just in the first quarter of this year, this is 2021, the first quarter of this year, Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa recorded about 2 million phishing attacks alone. So it's a really, really, really high number. And just yesterday we saw that, was it yesterday or the previous day? We saw that a lot of circles in Kenya are losing loads of money from cyber attacks. So phishing plays a very important role or very large role in terms of attacks themselves and loss of money, especially in businesses. Business email compromise plays a really big part in loss of money and intellectual property. So phishing always plays a really good role in that. Then, so for attackers, there are currently hundreds, if not thousands, honestly. If you just Google phishing on GitHub, you'll see hundreds of thousands of open source or private tools that enable attackers to manage, deploy, or automate phishing campaigns. So they'll do almost everything for you. They'll design the templates, they'll help you send the campaign, how to do it, and so on and so forth. So phishing has become relatively easier for, not just easier, but more available for attackers to be able to do. And a lot of the hard work that went into it has been made easier so that it's a lot easier for hackers to do it now. So with this information, we can see that phishing emails are now really, really sophisticated. They're really hard to detect even for users, even for IT people, they're really hard to detect. and they're really highly convincing. So they're no longer just send me some money, or they have like really bad spelling. They no longer have that. So even the user awareness techniques we send, or the user awareness training we give, is no longer relevant. So attackers these days will implement really highly technical and non-technical techniques in order to trick users into clicking a link or downloading an attachment. There are even techniques of phishing where they don't even require user interaction at all. So that's really dangerous. So a couple of weeks ago, I think Microsoft put out a blog post which showed a really, really cool technique where an attacker was able to bypass malware and spam filters by adding like blank text with font 0 so as to bypass filters. There was another one who was able to insert invisible Unicode characters onto the link itself, the link that the user is supposed to click. So that was able to deter the malware scanner or the email gateway from seeing that this is actually a malicious link. So those were really, really cool techniques, and they're becoming a lot more creative and a lot more sophisticated. So attackers are outside just being really creative and being really like cool about it. I'm not praising phishing people. So outside just being really creative about it, attackers are also using legitimate mail and authentication infrastructure that exists on the internet in order to facilitate the delivery of their phishing email. So these days we will see attackers using third-party mail relays such as Mailjet, SMTP to go, and we'll see that as well as we go along. So you will see attackers using third-party mail relays and SSL in the infrastructure in order to deliver high reputation email or phishing email to their targets. So right now it appears as if phishing is easy and worth it, and it kind of sort of is, but it's not easy anymore. There are so many vendors and there are so many email assets out there whose main can to spot any malicious email, and they're getting pretty good at it. So attackers are now scrambling to try and find out how exactly, as a red team or as a pen tester or even as a malicious attacker, how do you ensure the delivery of your fish? And that is why we're here. So before we get into the meat of the session, we'll run through a small primer of what SMTP or Simple Mail Transfer Protocol is, and the predominant email infrastructure we see in corporate settings, at least locally. But you'll see it on a very high level, we won't go very deep into it. So SMTP is typically it's a TCP protocol that allows you to send mail. So SMTP also relies on POP and IMAP, which is part of the email protocols. So let's say you're sending an email. So this should be recipient, sorry. Let's say you're sending an email from here and it needs to get to here. So as a sender, I will use, let's say, Gmail, I will use Zimbra, Office 365, I will use Roundcube, I will use whichever email clients available to me. And when I hit the send button, let's say my name is Malusi and I want to send to Laura. So when I hit the send button on my Gmail, my Gmail will open a connection to my SMTP server. So an SMTP server is essentially responsible for sending or pushing email forward. So it will automatically connect to your SMTP server and establish a connection. So once I do that, my SMTP server will be able to get information such as my sender's email address, my receiver, so who is sending, who is receiving, and what am I sending. So the contents, the email body, the contents, the sender and the receiver's email address. So the SMTP server will carry the email, and it will carry the email, and from this receiver's email address, it will determine the domain of the receiver. Okay, so if I sent it from malusi@gmail.com, so if my receiver is laura@gmail.com, my SMTP server will send it immediately. If it is laura@yahoo.com, my SMTP server will use DNS. Okay, DNS is another thing altogether. But my SMTP server will use DNS, which is represented by the internet. But it will use DNS to determine the receiver's SMTP server. So DNS at this point will establish the receiver's SMTP server and push that email. So at this point, this is smtp.yahoo.com. Okay. So the recipient server will then pass down this email from me. It will pass down this email to POP3. This is POP version 3 or IMAP, which is then responsible for delivering this email to LoRa. So that is essentially how SMTP works. So SMTP runs on port 25 or 587, and in other cases, if you wanted to encrypt it, it could be 2525. So that happens a lot. So you'll see port 25, 587, or 2525. Then POP runs on 110, IMAP runs on, I've forgotten. But this is essentially what happens when you send an email. Yeah, so this is a very, very simplified situation. So when it comes to email infrastructure, we are going to ignore this situation for now. We're going to ignore this infra, but this is infrastructure for a fisher or a fisherman. So we'll come to typical corporate email infrastructure. So once I've sent my email, the very first server it usually encounters or at the edge of infrastructure is usually an email gateway or a secure email gateway. So email gateways or secure email gateways are usually designed to work in two ways. So they're like they're filter for emails. So they're designed to work in two ways. Number one, they will attempt to validate an email sender through domain authentication, domain reputation, or even the reputation of the sender themselves. And number two, they will try to validate the contents of that email using threat intelligence, malware scanning, spam scanning, or even content analysis tools. So pretty popular email gateways are like Proofpoint, you'll see Cisco, you'll see Forcepoint, even Exchange. Exchange has Exchange Online Protection as its default email gateway that comes once you register Office 365 for business. So once your email goes through the email gateway, it goes through a firewall. This is if they have a firewall. It goes through a firewall. It goes through the firewall. They're called what? Firewall checks whether this traffic is actually meant to be going inbound. If it is, it lands onto the SMTP server, so the local SMTP server. So this could be Exchange, it could be Roundcube, it could be Google G Suite, and so on and so forth. Then the SMTP sends it to the victim via POP and IMAP. Once the victim clicks, then something happens. It could be malware is downloaded or credentials are stolen. So this is typical email infrastructure. So when you're phishing or when you want to send a phishing attack, this is something you have to consider. And this is something you have to research and try and figure out, how do I bypass spam checks or malware checks? Yeah. So now that we've seen how phishing is effective and how typical email infrastructure is, so how do you phish? So how do I go about phishing? So this is a step-by-step scenario of phishing. So the typical phishing process goes through a series of steps which build on one another. So this is of course dependent on whether you have one target or multiple targets. So let's say I've been commissioned to do a phishing campaign on company X to try and figure out how many people are susceptible to phishing, or I've been commissioned by one company to try and do phishing campaigns for many regional small companies. So phishing varies depending on how many targets you have. So the number of targets will also define the type of infrastructure you build. So the first thing you want to do when you're phishing is target recon. So this is where you try and gather as many emails as you need, try and gather the sort of environments that they exist in, and so on and so forth. We're going to talk about that in a bit. Number two, after you've gathered what you need to, you want to create the infrastructure you're going to use to send the phishing emails. Then number three, you want to do a target infrastructure recon. So this is where you try to understand the infrastructure, the email infrastructure of targets. Then you're going to try, you're not going to try, you're going to build your campaigns. This is the campaign you're going to be sending out. And finally, you're going to send your phish. So the first step is to gather emails. So this wasn't a presentation where we were doing hands-on anything. So when it comes to gathering emails, there's so many tools you can use. You can use Hunt.io, the Harvester, Simply Email. There's so many tools available up there. Most of them open source that can help you gather as many emails as you need for your target. So this is a pretty common step, and many people are able to do it. But after gathering emails, I've found that once you pass them, you have to pass them through an email verifier. So an email verifier, for example, Hunt.io offers email verification in bulk. So this is something you might want to do. So an email verifier essentially checks whether these emails are valid or not, they are valid for use or not. So when you scan through an email verifier, you usually get four results. Yeah, you get valid, so the email is valid for use, so you can send an email to that email. There's also accept all, so we're going to talk about accept all in a few. Then there's invalid, so these are emails you should remove from your list. And then there's unknown, these are also emails you should remove from your list. So when it comes to accept all, so some domains have an accept all policy. So an accept all policy means for any email that has that domain attached to it, the SMTP server will regard it as valid. So this is a really dangerous thing. This accept all policy is really dangerous because sometimes you can just send and you never get any reply back and you think it's gotten. But really, when they get to the server blocks them from going inside the network. But you don't get any feedback regarding whether or not it's made through. So I really don't like this accept all, and you see it a lot in Kenyan spaces. So number one, you want to pass them through an email verifier. Hunt.io has the best one. Then number two, pass them through or filter through to get users with the highest chance of clicking. So if you have a single target, let's say you are running a phishing campaign, let's say against NHIF. Yeah, this is an example. Please do not do it without legal consent. Let's say you're running a phishing campaign to NHIF. So you want to filter out people who might see, who might notice that this is a phishing email. So try and avoid people working in IT generally. So the best people are usually HR, legal, marketing. People in HR are very good because I think most of their work is usually just to check email and download things. So for them, it's really easy. So another thing when you're doing target recon is when it comes to single target phishing campaigns, so you have one target, it is important to look for credentials. So like webmail credentials in data breaches. So you can easily find them, by the way, which you can then use to compromise a user's accounts and then use that webmail as your point of launch. So the good thing about this is there's no need for gateways to check your email content because this is a recognized email within the company. So try and look for this when you're doing a target recon. So after you've collected all your emails and all your emails are valid for use, the next thing you want to do is to build your infrastructure. So typical phishing infrastructure has three major parts. So you have your mail originator, which is essentially your SMTP server. You have your phishing server, and you have your SMTP relay. We're going to talk about all of this in a bit. So when it comes to building your infrastructure, this is where you will spend the bulk of your time. Building infrastructure takes forever, especially when it comes to the SMTP server itself. You have to be very delicate and very particular about it. It's also quite frustrating because it has a lot of moving parts and it's a little bit complicated to keep up with everything. So some people will combine the SMTP server with the phishing server and have them as one. Some people will forgo the phishing server altogether and send the email just from the SMTP server. And when you're setting this one up like this, the only way so the SMTP server is set up in such a way that only the phishing server's IP is the one responsible for sending email. So that's why we have segregated them. There's usually no benefit to doing it. It makes it easier to manage infra, at least for me. So the choice is really up to you. Would you rather have both would you rather have one? So the SMTP relay in this scenario is basically for OPSEC, operational security. So it just relays all SMTP traffic, and it acts as a redirector for your traffic. So the main job of an SMTP relay is to obfuscate or to hide the origin of your mail. So in case your operation is banned, the SMTP relay is usually the first one to go down. And if your operational security for the rest of your infra was bad, then your mail originator goes down as well. So, and setting up a mail server, it takes forever and it's hectic. So you never want your mail server to be exposed. So we're going to talk about what the SMTP server is about and what the phishing server is about. But essentially, an SMTP relay is a redirector for your SMTP traffic. So traffic will go from here, from this scenario, go to the SMTP relay, and finally end up in your target's network, hopefully. So when it comes to setting up your mail server, so as I mentioned before, the mail server is quite hectic to build. So essentially, this is the SMTP server that your phishing server will use to send out email. So your phishing server needs mail credentials or mail capabilities in order to send out phishing email. So that's where the mail server comes in. So a proper and functioning mail server has so many moving parts that all have to be incredibly perfect for mail to be sent out correctly. So it takes a while to build a mail server that's correctly built, and it requires the following to be functional or perfect. First of all, your domain name, as we mentioned before. You need a domain name. So when it comes to domain names, we're going to talk about it in a bit. So your domain has to have a good reputation. So the better the reputation, the easier it is for it to escape spam. The correct categorization. So if you have bad categorization, for example, your domain is categorized as a porn domain, then your email is never going to go anywhere. Your domain should not be blacklisted. This is also hectic because a lot of IPs, I think a big chunk of the internet is blacklisted. So finding a clean IP address is really, really difficult these days. So that's why you never want your mail server to be banned or to be blacklisted ever. So that's why you have your OPSEC has to be good. So domains is like wine. So the older it is, the better it is. Wine or whiskey or whatever. So the older it is, the better it is. So your domain has to be a little bit old. So usually 3 months. So when you're coming up with phishing infrastructure, you have to have your phishing infrastructure has to have stayed just dormant for a really long time for your domains to I don't know, ripen. Ripen. I think I'm going to say that. So now that your domain is good, it has a good reputation, it's correctly categorized, it's not blacklisted, and it's quite old, you need a couple of DNS records. For anything to sort of work on the internet with a domain, you have to, so a domain has to be assigned an A record. So an A record will just point to this domain points to this IP. So that's a DNS record that just shows this domain is this IP. So if you are using IPv6, you use a quad A DNS record. For it to become a mail server, you have to put an MX record. So it just identifies this server as a mail server for this domain. Then other than this, essentially at this point, if you have an A record or an MX record, your server on the internet is seen as a mail server. But for it to work correctly, as we mentioned before, you need an SPF record, a DKIM record, a DMARC record, and a PTR record. So I'm just going to talk about the PTR record. I have added a bit more reference for these three DNS records. They're a bit complicated to explain, but they are essential records for your mail server to work correctly. So a PTR record is the opposite of an A record. An A record will assign an IP to a domain, and a PTR record will assign a domain to an IP. So they both have to exist for this mail server to be correct. Then we have assigned DNS records, we have a good domain name. So the next thing we want is a mail server runs three primary things. It runs a web server. So that's where Nginx or Apache comes in. These are very popular web servers. It also runs Dovecot and Postfix. So these are services that enable SMTP to work. So Dovecot and Postfix are essentially SMTP services in Linux situations. So you have to configure SSL or TLS certificates for all these servers, for Nginx or Apache, Dovecot or Postfix. So when installing a mail server, I typically use iRedMail. That's a really good option. So iRedMail will come pre-installed. When you install iRedMail, it comes with Apache, Dovecot, and Postfix, after which you'll have to install SSL certificates for all these services. Then the last two are not really paramount or mandatory, but in order for, but this is just for OPSEC. So remove any email headers. We're going to talk about email headers in a few, but when you're sending email when you're sending phishing email, try and remove postfix email headers, because this usually points back to your IP as a originating server. So this can be bad for OPSEC. Also, this is not mandatory, but configure port 587 as your primary SMTP rather than port 25. A lot of email gateways have port 25 blocked, especially from external sites. So be keen about that. Yeah, so back to the domains. So the name of the domain you want is dependent on your operational plan and the targets you have. So if you have one target, it's a lot easier to spoof them. So let's say my target is Safaricom, then I will spoof that domain by having Safaricom, but the I is an L, something like that. So that's domain spoofing. So are you going to phish using a domain that's similar to your target's domain, or are you going to be using a general domain that can work against numerous targets? So this is dependent on the type of campaign you want to run. Yeah, so if you have many targets, then that would be a good option to have a generic domain. So if I have target A, B, C, and D, all of whom are Kenyan companies, then I would have a domain like NHIF, because I'm certain at least all of them have NHIF accounts, something generic that can work against all of them. But if I have one target, then I'd spoof one of their domains. So you might want to think about that. Then there are two ways when getting a domain. There are two ways to get a domain, by the way. There are two general ways to get a domain. One, you can buy your own domain. So you can buy a brand new self-categorized domain. Or number two, you can buy an expired domain. So when you are looking at your domain, so whether you want to spoof or have a generic one, the first thing you want to do is to check its category. So I just want to mention that when you're buying a new one, you might want to give it time to mature. So time could be 3 months to as long as you want. So you want to give it time to mature. So a new domain does not have a category, is not assigned any category, and it does not have a really good reputation. So reputation depends on the age of your domain. So when you're buying an expired domain, which is a domain that has already been used, you might want to check its category. So there are domains on the internet that have been assigned particular categories. So categories could be finance, banking, legal, and so on, educational, and so on and so forth. There are all types of categories out there. So what you want for your domain when you're checking it or when you're requesting a category is you want categories like health, finance, or banking categories, because these are categories that are not quite so easily blocked by spam filters or malware filters. So you can request your category from services like Symantec or FortiGuard, or any service essentially that has a database of these categories. So number one, check its category and make sure it's a good category. Number two, check its reputation, especially if you're buying an expired domain. It has to be reputable, and it has to have the appropriate category. So when checking reputation, you can use, I think VirusTotal does that. You can also use MX Toolbox, which is a really cool service for mail issues. You can check. Yeah, so the older your domain is, the better the reputation is, and the more easier it is for it to escape spam. if you do everything correctly. Then finally, do not buy domains in the middle of your operation. Like I've mentioned, the older your domain is, the better it is. So if you buy it, then already you have fumbled with your categorization, you have fumbled with your reputation. So you don't buy domains in the middle of your operation. Yeah, so we have set up our mail server at this point. So we have set up a read mail. We have put we have the correct domain, we have everything together. Our DNS records have resolved and they have propagated correctly. So once you finish setting up your mail server, you can use a service such as Mail Tester. It looks really pretty, but it's a very essential service when you're setting up your mail server. So Mail Tester is essentially a service that will check the spamminess of your mail, or how easily your mail will end up in the spam folder. Oh, I should mention, when you're phishing, the point is for your email to end up in the recipient's inbox. So for example, if you have a Gmail and you have categorized it, so you don't want it to end up in updates or promotion, you want it to end up in inbox, because that's a very fast place a lot of us will check. So so when you are testing your mail server, you want to get a score of 10 out of 10. So Mail Tester will test the authentication, the content of your email, whether you have set up everything correctly, all your DNS records. So the point is to get a 10 out of 10. But a 10 out of 10 score does not necessarily mean that your emails will end up in the receiver's inbox folder. It just means that you have set up your mail server correctly, and that is it. So the next point is, how do I get it off spam? Even when you send this email from your mail server to your Gmail, it will immediately end up in spam. I can tell you for a fact that if you send an email from a mail server that has just scored 10, if you send it to Gmail, it will end up in spam. If you send it to Outlook, it will not even show up. So yeah, it does not usually mean anything. It just means that your mail server is configured correctly. So now how do I move from spam into inbox? So a few things have helped me out. Number one, disable IPv6 on your mail servers. IPv6 usually messes up SPF records. So disable IPv6 on your mail servers. Number two, always verify the email list. So this helps you because, okay, so when you're sending an email, the SMTP server will check through its address list, and your email can bounce. So there are two types of bouncing. There's a soft bounce and then there's a hard bounce. So a soft bounce is when the email has gotten into the SMTP server, the address exists, but for some reason it does not end up onto the recipient's inbox. So that's a soft bounce, and that you can work with. Then there's a hard bounce. A hard bounce is the SMTP server just rejects it, either because the address does not exist or you have been blacklisted or some reason. Then, so when you verify, you avoid the bouncing of emails. So the more bounces you have, the more likely you're going to end up in spam. Number three, implement the use of third-party SMTP release. We talked about SMTP release earlier. SMTP release, which we call the redirectors of our infra. Yeah, so there are two ways to implement SMTP relays. You can use your standalone SMTP relay. This is just a relay that you have complete control over, and you have installed it, and you're the one who is controlling this relay. So this won't work. I've written a blog about it, so if you're interested in seeing why it won't work, I've written about it. I've linked it in the end, shameless plug. But I'll encourage you to use third-party SMTP relays such as SendGrid, MailJet, Mailgun, and so on and so forth. But sometimes this third-party SMTP relays won't work. So you have to be cognizant of that fact. It won't work, especially with domains with accept all policies. So be cognizant about that fact. So third-party SMTP relays are really good because one, the reputation of the SMTP relay itself is beneficial for your email into getting into inbox. Like, it carries that reputation. So essentially it almost always guarantees that your email will end up in inbox. Then finally, this really like messed me up at some point. Include an unsubscribe link, even if it's a fake one. Just have the word unsubscribe on it. So sometimes your SMTP relay will check the contents of your email, and if it's not there, then the SMTP relay won't send your emails. So just always include an unsubscribe link, even if it's a fake one. So spam control is a hit or a miss, especially with different mail clients. So with Gmail, it might work. With Outlook, it might not work. With Roundcube, it might work. So the point is, it needs to get to the inbox of all email clients. So that's why it's really important. That's why it's important to thoroughly test as much as you can before sending out phishing campaigns, because this will increase your success rate. Yeah, so we talked about the mail originator or your SMTP relay, which is the most important part of your infra, by the way. So the phishing server just uses a phishing framework, and the most popular phishing framework is GoPhish. So GoPhish will just plan out or manage your whole phishing campaign. It will you can plug in your users, you can plug in your you can plug in your users, you can plug in what is it? You can make your email templates, you can schedule your campaign, you can get results. It just manages the whole process of sending a phishing campaign out. You can do without it, by the way. You can do without a phishing server and just use the SMTP or the email clients that comes with your SMTP server. But I find that having a phishing server just makes it easier. Just having a phishing framework just makes it easier to manage the whole thing and see, especially if you're writing reports, it's a really good way to visualize how your campaign went. Yeah, so finally, SMTP relays, we've talked a little bit about it, and we mentioned that it's important to have, or I'd advise you to have a third-party service, such as SMTP to go, SendGrid, Mailjet, or Mailgun. By the way, all these services are paid services. You can get some which are free, but they only allow you to send like 200 emails in a day. Which, if that works for you, that's also good. But I think with these things, there's a lot of infrastructure, you just need to spend money. So SMTP relays, especially third parties, have better reputation, so they guarantee that it's going to end up in inbox. Sometimes they end up in promotions, so you have to do some more spam control. They have better reputation, and they will give you the same email delivery reports that a phishing framework like GoPhish would give you. So they can tell you how many people opened, how many people clicked, what was the delivery rates, who didn't receive, who marked your email as spam, and so on and so forth. So they give you really good reports. You can visualize, you can see graphs. So yeah, I really like third party. So we have built our infrastructure, and we have collected emails, and we are now ready to start phishing. So at this point, all our infra is set up. So now you want to build your fish. This is the email you're going to send out. So when you're crafting your email templates, you have to define the contents of your email. So what do you want to communicate, right? What response do you want to trigger? Do you want someone to be fearful enough to do something? Do you want someone to feel FOMO, like I have to do this thing? Do you want to trigger curiosity or panic? So what type of content do you want to put out, or what do you want to communicate? Number two, what is the goal of this phishing? What is the goal of this phishing campaign? Is it to collect credentials, or is it to get shells? Okay, because defining your goal then defines the infrastructure that you're going to set up to make sure that the goal is successful. Then number three, what is the delivery method? Do you want to use a URL, or do you want to have them download an attachment? Because this then also determines whether or not you're going to host your payload remotely. So are you going to need a payload server? So then you're going to think about the phishing technique to use. Sorry, there are many phishing techniques available out there. The most common one is malicious documents, which you can use macros, OLEs, SLKs in Excel, or DDEs. You can have HTML smuggling. So there are many techniques out there for both credential harvesting or getting shells. So this is something we can talk about some other day, but there are many phishing techniques to use. So the one you decide to use also determines what sort of infrastructure you're going to build. Okay. Yeah, so at this point you have the content. What are you communicating? You have it in place. Your goal. Are you collecting what credentials, or are you uh trying to get what kills? Number three, how are you delivering your malware, right? Are you using a URL, or are they downloading an attachment? And what technique are you using to make sure that your goal is met? So you can craft your email template at this point. And please make sure it works for all scenarios. So this email templates that you have created, make sure it looks the same all across the most common email clients. This template, make sure it looks good on Outlook, on Roundtube, or on Gmail, even on Twitter Nota. Try simulate this thing as much as you possibly can, because it might look good on Gmail and look terribly bad on Outlook, which then just defeats the whole point. Yeah, so we have everything down, and now we actually want to send it. So this is something I actually found out like a couple of weeks ago from an incredible presentation that was done by Sebastian Sella in B-Sides, I think, of last year. I've attached his presentation, but the point here is for you to understand what type of scenario, what type of infrastructure your target has. So the goal is to understand, what am I working with? So even if I send my email, is it actually going to get there? So this is why I try and figure out, do they have an email gateway? Do they have a firewall? What type of server do they use? So even if everything you have set up is working fine, even if your links and your attachments are not being caught by any malware scanners, this is where like things can go really badly. So you have to make sure that you do this recon correctly. So the thing here that I'd advise is to understand email headers as much as you possibly can. Yeah, so email headers are important in this situation. This recon, trying to understand the email infrastructure of your targets. So you can get information about their infra in two ways. Number one, you can make the victim send you an email. So let's say I'm trying to phish Kenyatta University, for example. I will go to their Twitter, or I'll go to their website, look for the contact email, send them an email. Once they respond back to me, I will analyze the email headers. So the email headers usually communicates everything that's going on within their network, especially with mail relays or like mail assets, right? So you can do that. Or number two, you can send an email to a non-existing user. So like, I don't exist at ku.ac.ke. So you can send an email to, and you can send an email to a recipient you're very certain does not exist within that domain. So what this does is the SMTP server will be forced to send you an NDR, which is a non-delivery report that tells you, okay, so we looked through our address list and we couldn't find this person. So the point of doing that is to get email headers as well. So you can get many email headers, or just email headers that show you what exactly happened during that communication. So find that sending an NDR is a lot easier than making a victim send you an email. Then I talked about accept all policy earlier. So I'll just reiterate. So accept all policy is a domain which essentially accepts all emails with that domain attached to it. So even if I send I don't exist at ku.ac.ke, and ku.ac.ke that has an accept all policy for all emails with that domain, then my email is essentially lost like that. I will get a response of, okay, like, is it 250? I think I'll get a response to 50, okay. So and I'll end up with no information ideally. So accept all policies are the worst. Yeah, so let's analyze an NDR. So when you receive an NDR, there's two bits. So the image on your right is essentially like, it's an example of a simple NDR. And I got this image from Microsoft Exchange. So this is essentially how it comes through. And it's broken down into two. So you have the user information section. So this section it appears fast, and it just explains to you in non-technical terms why the delivery of the message failed. Then you have the second section, which is a diagnostic information for administrators. So this just shows you, it provides a deeper technical information or explanation to help, this is for admins by the way, to help admins understand what happened or why the delivery failed. Yeah, so you can see that the reason here was a matching connector could not be found throughout the external recipient. So what you want by, so diagnostic information for administrator section, this second section included, this is a default reply. So it's included by Exchange. Okay, I'm talking about Exchange because Exchange is the predominant SMTP server in the Kenyan cyberspace. So you will see this a lot. So this section is included by Exchange, and it has an untampered extract of the original inbound message headers. So it has, all these headers are like legit. They have not been tampered with, they've not been edited or anything. So it will include all mail relays. So if you have a secure email gateway, if you have even more than 3 types of gateways, it will have all that information in there, and they've not been edited, and they have sensitive information. So when it comes to mail infrastructure or email infrastructure, it relies on interoperability, which can be manipulated. So email infrastructure communicates essentially through email headers. So they are the vehicle through which communication is shared in different technologies. So if you have a spam filter, if you have a firewall, if you have an SMTP server, all of these technologies will communicate via email headers. So for example, your malware filter, we want to inform your spam filter. Sorry. Okay, let me rush through. So your spam filter may want to inform your malware filter of its findings, and then your malware filter will want to add additional headers which indicate that the message has been scanned through XYZ criteria and so on and so forth, all the way to Exchange, which is your email server. And then when Exchange sends you that non-delivery report, you can see all of that information. So for example, if your target has an SCG in their email infrastructure, you might be able to see how the email was scanned, how it was checked, and even the score, which then can allow you to craft a near perfect fish. I haven't tried this out yet, but when I do try, I'm going to let you guys know. Yeah, so finally, you can send your fish, you can send your phishing email or campaign. So the best time, this is from marketing, the best time to send your email is Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday morning from 8 to 9 a.m. And then when you're using a third party, just don't flood people. You send a very small number. Don't overdo it. Otherwise, you will be flagged. Then, as I mentioned, your third-party SMTP relay will give you results. So we scan how many emails were opened, how many have been flagged as spam, and the delivery rates of your phishing campaign. So these results will allow you to rethink or edit your fish for better success. Then finally, tips and tricks. So this is what has worked out for me before. Wait, yes. Number one, simulate. Try as much as possible to see how your fish looks in every environment. You can set up a simple Exchange server in your lab setup. You can try and get round cube access. You can even use your own Outlook, your Gmail, just see how it looks. Number two, understand email headers. When it comes to phishing, email headers are like your notifications. Number three, DNS records can be a bit tedious, so make sure they're correct and they have propagated correctly. So this sometimes can take 24 hours, especially with DKIM records. Then number four, don't overdo your campaign. Somebody will notice if you overdo it. Number five, enumerate your targets as much as possible. Sometimes your target has an SMTP server where they have not assigned them SPF records or DKIM records or DMARC records, and this can allow you to email spoof. So that's a really good way of increasing your click rates. Number six, avoid rookie mistakes. Just check through your grammar and punctuation errors. I should mention that when you're sending a phishing campaign, the subject is usually something that will draw them in. So work really hard on your subject. Number 7, avoid typical scenarios because users have been trained on it and they will immediately flag it. Number 8, remove all email headers that show where the email is coming from. So that's received, originating IP, the mailer, and the user agent. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. Are there any questions? Oh, and I've added some resources if you want to check them out. Are there any questions? Where do I go?
Malusi, so in the interest of time, we're just going to ask, I think we have 2 main questions. Actually, one. From Edna, she says how, and this is, since this is Cyber Awareness Month, maybe you can answer this one, Malusi. How do we protect our parents who have smartphones and don't understand these emails and text?
So like how essentially do we not get phished? Is that what is being asked?
Yes, especially for people who may not be tech savvy.
Oh, okay. So the first thing they tell people with phishing awareness is look at the spelling. So that's a really common thing that they tell people. Look at the spelling. Also, just know, by the way, you can always be phished, regardless of how much you think you know. So look at the spelling. Think about it. Is it an email you were expecting? Okay, so for older people, there are a few things. Number 1, is it an email you were expecting? If it is not, then think critically about it. Number 2, what does this email make you feel? Right? Like, are you scared? Ama, do you feel like you are are there consequences to this thing? Like, if you don't click, this will happen. So if there is a sense of urgency or worry or panic or fear in an email that you are not expecting, then think about it. I know like parents may not be able to like know how to hover over a link and see whether the domain is correct and so on and so forth. But just think through the feelings of this email. Does it feel correct? Does it feel like this is something that can happen? So yeah, for me, the thing once I tell this to my parents, when you look at this email, look at it very well. Is it something you're expecting? Do you think, for example, KQ has your email address? Do you really think they have your email address? If my mom says no, then I'm like, this is probably a phishing scam. So for older people, it's just how they feel about the email itself. I know they may not be able to understand, but also it's important for us to communicate that phishing plays a really big part in them losing their data or their money and so on and so forth. So it's just on baseline information. How do you feel about it? Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Malusi. That was a really good answer. And that was a very, very good session. Job, we're going to skip that one because we are 20 minutes past the time we're supposed to start the next session. But Malusi, thank you so much. You can maybe answer in the chat. And yes, thank you, Malusi. It's been a very insightful discussion. And for anyone who wants to follow her work, she's going to post her blog, the link to her blog in the chat, and also her Twitter. Malusi, please do that.
Thank you so much for having me, Laura. Sorry I
All
went
right.
over the time, but thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Yeah, thank you so much, Malusi. So next, I want to invite our last, third and final speaker for the day, CK. CK leads the Aspire team at ICRAL Innovation Hub. And the purpose of Aspire is to mentor young individuals who are aspiring to be cybersecurity professionals. CK has experience in diverse areas of InfoSec and is currently focused on the area of operational technology. CK, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Teach. I enjoyed your presentation, Malusi. Hopefully, I'll get to see it again at a slower pace, but I'm still at the office and I need to get home too. So I'm going to start my presentation immediately. So let me share my slides. So I hope everyone can see my slides.
We can.
So our topic for today is going to be an exploration of the IC/IoT world. And the title is The Digital World Meets the Physical. I'm going to expound on this as we progress, so let's move on. I think Teach has already introduced me, so I'm going to be pretty quick here, but that's my Twitter handle and that's my blog. So if you're interested in any of the stuff I talk here, I'm most likely going to post it on the blog at some point, so you can check that out. As Teach said, I lead the mentorship team at ICRAN Innovation Hub, and my experience has varied over the years. So for now, we'll focus on the ICS IoT world. So these are the topics we will cover. We are going to start with the history of the world of operational technology. You'll hear me interchange the terms. You'll hear me talk about operational technology, ICS, IoT, IoT, and so on and so forth, but I'll clarify on what each of these terms mean. So don't worry about that for now. So after we go through the history, we'll go through the evolution. We'll then go through a breakdown of the major components that make up ICS environments. We'll go into architectures and how they should be designed. After that, we are going to explore some of the protocols a bit. Then we'll go into the security of ICS environments. We'll do a couple of case studies, and then finally, we'll have a demo. Hopefully time will permit. So the field is vast. So for this, I'm going to do an introductory walkthrough. As the title suggests, it's exploratory. So hopefully I'll be able to break them down into more detailed parts and then probably write about them from the start to the end. So let's start with the history. So as I said here, we'll cover about how this field has evolved over time and why it's relevant to us, because we as cybersecurity professionals aren't traditionally involved with this field. So the very, very start of this field is simply automation. By automation, I mean, let's take the very, very basic thing of a light that automatically turns on or off when you enter a room. So let's say you have a room that has a motion sensor. So once you enter the room, the sensor senses that you have entered the room, turns on the light. Once you leave, there's no motion, the lights go off. So that's the simplest form of explanation of automation I can explain. And you can see the benefit of it. First of all, previously you would have had to go click a switch, probably look for it in the dark and so on and so forth. Another thing, so that's the convenience aspect. It gives you convenience. The other thing is it helps you save energy because at the very least, you are sure unless there's someone in the room, the light will be off. So again, cuts cost on your electricity bill. You're unlikely to forget that you turned off the lights. So as time has evolved, this has been scaled up to factories, industries, and almost every aspect of our lives. We have smart cities, we have smart cars. Almost every aspect of our life is now adopting automation. So like for the industries are mostly based about converting a raw material into a processed product. So previously you'd have people, manual labor actually being involved in the aspects of this work. But there are a lot of things that led to automation being adopted. And this leads to the advantages of automations in the industry. These now are much, much more than the simple light bulb, because at this point, you are going to have a repeatable process, so you ensure efficiency. Someone gets tired, a machine never gets tired. They'll do the same thing over and over and over again. Productivity, it's going to be faster, you're going to save costs. There are so many advantages. So I think those are self-explanatory. I won't dwell too much on them. And these applications can be grouped into various subsections. So these are the sections that you can see here. So I'm going to describe these terms and explain what they mean. And what you see here is what encompasses operational technology. Operational technology brings together all of these separate subsectors. Some people may refer it to cyber physical systems, operational technology, it's the same thing. So we are going to start with ICS, SCADA. ICS means industrial control systems. SCADA is supervisory control and data acquisition. So for ICS SCADA, this means that you have control of different, I would say different plants, manufacturing plants of a wide geographical area, let's say of our whole country. So let's say we have a centralized control center that monitors all the power plants in Kenya. That would be a SCADA system. It could also have, it doesn't have to be the same sector. So it could be one industry is power generation, another one is a water facility, a water treatment plant, but they are all controlled at a central location. That means there's a supervisory control. That's why it's called ICS SCADA. ICS DCS means industrial control systems, and then the DCS means distributed control systems. For the DCS, that means it's localized to one plant or one factory. So it's within that one factory. So if it's Kenya Power, we aren't talking about the whole company. We are going to talk about one very specific plant at one location. I know the terms distributed seems pretty counterintuitive, but that is localized to that one specific location. IoT, I know a lot of people know about IoT. This is a network that interconnects physical objects using the internet. So these are your smart bulbs. Nowadays, there are smart fridges, smart coffee makers, and so on and so forth. So you have a network that connects all these devices and you can control them remotely or on the network. IoT is now an extension of the IoT world into the industry. So the major difference is that the IoT devices need to be more rugged to withstand some extreme conditions. So it's usually devices that have a better construction, but they may play the same role. It started, these four fields have started interacting together, so you'll see them almost used interchangeably in some areas. You'll find a manufacturing plant that has all these aspects. So let's go through now the evolution of IoT, since we now already know what OT is, So OT, as I said, is now operational technology. By OT, I mean everything that involves operational technology. That's the IoTs, the SCADA, and so on and so forth. So it all started with the first industrial revolution. This is between the 1700s and the 1900s. That's when we started have manufacturing, we started having steel, electricity being used in industry, the steam engines, cars started being built, and so on and so forth. So that was the first industrial revolution. We started moving away from a major agricultural economy to an industrial economy. In the 1900s, we started using relays. So relays are devices that, the best way to describe it is, it has an input and an output. On the input side, you supply an input that turns on the output side. So the input side is usually a low current side or a low voltage side. Then the output side is a high voltage side. So let's say you want to turn on the electricity in your house or a motor in your house. You would connect it to the high voltage side, the output side. On the input side, you could put a switch. So the switch, once the switch is on, it turns on the output. It's some form of safety measure to prevent the user from interacting with the high voltage side. Then after that, we had the invention of the first programmable logic controllers. That was in 1969. I'll talk more about what first programmable logic controllers are. In short, they are called PLCs. They are digital computers that replaced these relays. In 1979, the Modbus protocol was invented. It's relevant because it's a major player in the world today. It's one of the most commonly used protocols. So we are going to explore it a bit. Then in 1986, PLCs started being controlled by computers. Before that, they were mostly standalone in the industry, but from 1986, you could control them using PLCs. Around 1992, we started networking PLCs. So we started having TCP/IP being involved with PLCs, thus coming into the digital world even further. So next, we are going to talk about the components that comprise these ICS environments. So I'm going to quickly go through them. I think most of them will be self-explanatory based on our everyday experiences. So the major ones are this. It's not an all-encompassing list, but these are the major ones. So we start with the sensors. So a sensor is basically a device that converts some characteristic in the real world to the digital world. So it could be temperature. It reads the temperature, a temperature sensor. It detects the temperature, then displays the temperature to you. So this could be a temperature sensor in your car, a thermostat. Even the normal thermometers are ideally sensors. They convert a characteristic in the physical world to the digital world. Actuators now do the reverse of the sensor. So they convert a digital signal to a physical thing. A very good example would be something like a speaker. A speaker, you supply it with an audio wave, then it produces sound. So it's converting something in the digital world to something in the physical world. Same thing with a motor controller. It takes in a signal, rotates a motor, then, so as you can see, the sensor is ideally the opposite of the actuator. The PLCs, as I said, now these are the digital computers that replaced relays. So instead of you going and pressing a switch to turn on the other side of the switch to, let's say, it's your motor, it's your lights, the PLC now does that for you. It's a digital computer that has all that logic to do that for you, and it's mostly used for automation. The HMI, this is usually software that is used to provide an interface to the user, the operator, so that they can either view the status or they can control the status and so on and so forth. So one very basic example would be an ATM machine. An ATM machine is a HMI. You have buttons, gives you an interface, you see, you can control, or let's say a normal tablet on a wall, that's a HMI device. It could also be a web interface where you have a display and some controls. So that's what an HMI is. It's a human-machine interface. The data historian is basically a database that records data. So in the ICS world, it would probably record values about sensors, what signals have been sent, is there alarms that have been read. So it's basically a database that keeps tracks of everything that has been going on. The engineering workstation is basically a computer that the engineer uses to program let's say program the PLCs or carry out various functions in the environment. So it's basically the computer that the engineer uses. So those are the major ones. Like for instance, under PLCs, you may hear other terms like remote terminal units. They're closely related, a bit different. You may hear about IEDs, which are newer versions of PLCs, but you'll find that these are the basic components. Next, we'll go into architectures, how ICH systems should be designed. This doesn't mean that a lot of environments have this done correctly, but ideally, there are models that have been defined that should be adopted. The most common one or the major one is called the Purdue model. It's a reference model. It's called the PERA. It's a Purdue Enterprise Reference Architecture. And its purpose is to be a guideline for industrial automation. So this also includes network and security requirements. So it's a 5-layer model, and it's used as a baseline for what a properly set up infrastructure should look like. And as with what we know in the IT world, the purpose is usually to ensure security at all the different levels, to isolate them and to ensure that they can be properly secured. So I'm going to go briefly over what the levels mean. So we have the enterprise zone. The enterprise zone is what you would now refer to as the traditional IT networks. So that's why you'd have your normal AD networks, your normal HR systems, and so on and so forth. So at the enterprise zone, you usually have the enterprise level and the business level. So level 5 is the enterprise level. Level 4 is the business level. Enterprise could be even remote sites connected together. Business level, that's even the normal user PCs, people on the AD, and so on and so forth. Then there should be, or is usually a DMZ zone that separates the enterprise level from the manufacturing zone. So this boundary is now what separates the manufacturing, the OT side of the network from the IT side of the network. After that, there's the manufacturing zone. The manufacturing zone doesn't mean, I talked about the ADs and the normal machines being in the enterprise zone, but we still have other systems that are used to control the operational technology network. That means we may have an actual AD specific to the operational devices. So that would fall in the manufacturing zone. The manufacturing zone would probably be systems you find in the control rooms and so on and so forth. So this could also include normal Windows systems, Linux systems, and so on and so forth. It could also include HMIs for displays and controls and so on and so forth. Below that, we go into the field zone or the cell area zone. Now here is where we have the actual PLCs, the programmable logic controllers, the sensors, the actuators, and so on and so forth. So at this point, we are directly interacting with the physical world or controlling the physical world. So ideally, there should be DMZ zones at every level, but you'll find most of the times it's one DMZ zone or no DMZ zone. So that's the Purdue reference model. At the stage we are right now, it's becoming a bit outdated with technologies such as edge computing. Not going to go too far into that, but that means that even the sensors themselves are starting getting connected to the cloud directly. So you may find a sensor being connected directly to the internet rather than going through this whole reference architecture. Next, we're going to talk briefly about the protocols. I think in the IT world, we are pretty conversant with the protocols we are used to. It's the IP networks. So we have all our SSH communication, our HTTP communication, and so on and so forth. So the OT network also has its own communication protocols that they use. Some of them include the ones you can see here. There is OPC, CIP, Modbus, S7. I won't go into the details. This would be a very long session, each of which would take a long time on its own. Probably just mention a few. As I said, Modbus is one of the most popular ones. It has both a serial version and a TCP/IP version. So for us in the IT world, the TCP/IP version can be connected directly to our Ethernet networks. It's mostly used by Schneider Electronic PLCs. The S7 network is used by Siemens. It's also an alternative common protocol. There's the DNP protocol. This is very popular with electricity companies and water treatment plants and so on and so forth. The OPC was an attempt to help different protocols communicate. So let's say you had a PLC from Schneider using Modbus, then another one from Siemens using the S7 protocol. OPC was an attempt to unify them. So you could plug them together to a middle box that would translate the different protocols to unify the communication. So there are so many others. If you go into building automation systems, there are protocols. There's one specific one called BACnet. So there are several protocols and each could form its own whole presentation. So there are also wireless ones. So it's not limited to wired. So it can go all the way from your normal Bluetooth, Wi-Fi networks, all the way to microwave communication, satellite communication, and so on and so forth. I'm going to talk a bit about IoT protocols. The major focus on this talk is on the ICS side, but I'll mention a few of the IoT protocols. So I think we know the basic ones. We know about the Wi-Fi ones. We know about Bluetooth, RFID. This is used in access cards, doors, and so on and so forth, where you have a card that is used in close proximity to the sensor. So for these protocols, again, you can split them into short range, medium range, long range, and so on and so forth. So this is also an area that is constantly developing. Recently, there is an attempt to unify different protocols in the IoT space to enable them to work together. It's a protocol called MATA. So it's something that is being pushed by a lot of companies, including Google, Apple, Amazon. So they are trying to unify all these protocols because there's a lot of segmentation currently. So if you are interested in the IoT space, it's something you should look at. So after that, I think we can basically now move away from the description of what the ICS environments are, the IoT environments are, and start talking about the security, which is now what is more relevant, I assume, to most of the people tuned in. So first, let's compare the traditional IT security versus OT security. So traditionally, what is important in IT security was the integrity of data, confidentiality, availability. So integrity is how sure are you that the data hasn't been manipulated. Confidentiality is who can access the data. Is it protected from unauthorized access? Availability, is the data available to people when they need them? Then when we come to the OT security side, again, we still have to consider these aspects. But in addition to that, we are interacting with the real world, which involves physical processes. So physical processes could be, as I said, power generation, water treatment, could be pipelines, the transfer of oil, and so on and so forth. And with this comes other aspects of security that are needed. Traditionally, these systems were built for safety. So the first aspect that the engineers put into consideration was how safe they were, because if an OT environment is compromised, the damage isn't the traditional damage we are used to. If an IT security system is compromised, you lose money, you lose your reputation, and so forth. If a physical system is compromised, you may lose lives. There's environmental damage. So environmental damage could be hazardous material is dumped into the environment, could be an oil plant in the ocean, leaks oil into the ocean, could be power grids are shut down, so hospitals don't have power, no one has power, could be no one has fuel, and so on and so forth. So there's that aspect of the environment. Then dependencies. A lot of these systems are used in critical infrastructure, and critical infrastructure is something that society depends on. So there are dependencies. It's not just that system. If the water plant is shut down or the water is contaminated, it isn't just that water plant that is affected. It affects the whole society as a whole. Then there's regulation. This area is heavily regulated because power generation, it's a very heavily regulated industry. I think even in the local market, you may find that even attempts to go into, let's say, solar power generation is heavily regulated. So there's a lot of regulation around this and enforcement of security measures. So in relation to that, OT security also comes with its own set of threat actors. The major ones are as follows. There's nation-state actors. This is actually something that has been employed recently and is becoming something that is being employed in an increasing rate. We'll talk about this in some of the case studies. So, but nation states usually are the major players in this space because they are interested in power grids of other countries. It's something that can give them an advantage, let's say, in an actual war or in normal espionage campaigns. Criminal groups, these are just your ordinary criminals. Someone just wants to make money, extortion, ransomware, the normal criminal. Malicious insiders, again, disgruntled employees, blackmailed employees, so someone who is inside the organization. And these ones are usually a major risk because you'll often find that most of these IoT systems or ICS systems still have the default passwords. No one wants to change the passwords because they are afraid of changing anything on these systems because of the sensitivity. So you'll find a lot of shared credentials. So malicious insiders may be a major threat. Activists, people who want to make a political statement, again, shut down a power grid because power prices are high. What else? Could be sabotage a pipeline, again, just to make a system. Maybe it's people who are for renewable energy, so they interfere with traditional means of power generation. So activists are also a threat actor that affects the OT security field. So then let's go through the challenges that affect OT in terms of security. So some of the major ones are listed. It's not exhaustive, but this should be the major ones in secure protocols. You will realize that in the IT world, we are approaching a place where we have end-to-end encryption. We have secure communication. This hasn't happened in the OT world as of yet. Most of the protocols are basic, simple, and without any form of security. So clear text, anyone can see what is going on over the network. There's no authentication, and so on and so forth. Neglect of the ICS networks. Traditionally, these networks weren't part of the IT network. They were left to the, let's say, your electrical engineers to manage, and they were left alone. The IT network, people didn't want to deal with them, and so they were separate. They were actually separate networks with some form of air gap between the two. But recently, these are being connected to now the regular IT networks, and they aren't being, attention isn't being given to them. So they are being added to the networks, but still being neglected. So no one wants to take ownership. The electrical engineer says, the IT said, the IT people said, the IT engineer says, those systems are managed by the electrical engineers. So there is that mismatch of role. Poor patch management, again, no one wants to touch these devices. And there are various reasons for this. First of all, these devices can be in an industry for over 20 years. If it works, it works. No one wants to be responsible for shutting down the power grid because they were trying to do an upgrade. In other instances, the upgrades aren't available. The manufacturer went out of business long ago. Another major thing is, again, neglect. They aren't in a proper patch management cycle. Poor access control. Normally in IT networks, you have all these controls. You have your ID networks, you have your firewalls, your IDSs, and so on and so forth. Again, for the ICS networks, everything is just connected to the network. There is no firewall for those devices. So they are just there with pure access control, shared credentials. No one wants to change anything. So again, that's a major risk. High availability requirements. So the challenge with this is these devices usually run forever and ever. So they are required to be running full time. So the only time you can make a change to them is during a routine maintenance. And these maintenance schedules may happen after a very long time. And by the time you are doing this, probably there were some vulnerabilities that have been discovered and were exploited long ago. Real-time performance requirements. Again, if I turn on a water, let's say treatment plant, if I switch off the injection of chemicals into the water, I want it to stop immediately. I don't want there to be a delay. So there's that real-time performance requirement. If there was a delay, there would be instances where, let's say, I turn off the chemical injector, then more chemical is still added with a delay. Then that water is poisonous and you poison a whole population. So that prevents things such as encryption. Encryption adds processing power to your devices. So they try to maintain these things as simple as possible, ensuring there isn't anything that can slow down the devices in terms of processing, latency, and so on and so forth. Geographic locations. Some of these devices are distributed, as we said, like in the SCADA systems. It could be a system that is controlling remote devices. Let's say a nuclear power plant. It's in a remote location. No one wants to go there to do updates to devices in the field. So the geographic location also matters. It could be an oil rig at sea. So doing updates to this again is a bit tricky. Legacy technologies, I think I've mentioned this. They are still stuck in the past. So very simple attacks like buffer overflows would probably work on these devices. Most mitigations haven't been applied yet. I've talked about limited support for security mechanisms, again, because these devices will most likely be prioritizing operation instead of having a processor with a higher speed or more RAM, so they are limited in what they can support. Then I think we've also talked about the convergence of IT and OT, where the OT network is coming into the IT network. So the normal regular hacker, once they get access to the IT network, now have a new playground to play with. So normally they would go after, let's say, the HR systems, the AD servers, and so on and so forth. But now you add another layer of attack. Then in addition to this, when it comes to ICS security, I think we are all used to the old traditional cyber kill chain that was popularized by Lockheed Martin, that I think a lot of people know about. It's what most people use when doing their pen tests. They try to emulate this. For ICS, it's a two-stage process, and stage one usually is what people in the IT world consider the cyber kill chain. So that's just stage one of the ICS networks. So you have the planning stage where you do recon, you identify your company, who do you want to phish, as Marusu said. Then after that, you go into the preparation, you do your infrastructure, you create your documents, your malicious documents, if it's phishing URLs and so on and so forth. Then after that, you go into the intrusion phase where you deliver your exploit. You send those emails, those phishing emails, you exploit them, and you probably install some remote access Trojan so that you have access to the system. After that, you have it communicate with your C2, or in some cases, you don't even need the C2. Probably you have SSH access, or you have access to VPN credentials of the company. Then after that, you now act on your objectives. So in the IT world, you could exfiltrate data, lateral movement, pivot to other systems, clean up, and so on and so forth. So that's the first stage of the ICS cyber kill chain. After that, the second stage is usually called the ICS attack development and execution. So during the first stage, you, let's say, gathered data, you did lateral movement, you identified what ICS systems were in the network. So you go back. There's usually a gap between the first and the second stage. So you may even find there's a gap of months between the two stages. So the first step of stage 2 is usually attack development and tuning. So what the attackers do is they now go develop, let's say, the specific payloads, the specific attack techniques that they are going to use to attack those ICS systems. This isn't being done where they are in the network, they've gone away from the network, and they are doing this in their own environment and test beds. After that, they test whether these attacks work, because as I said, this isn't something you can go and try your luck with. You can't go try your luck with nuclear enrichment company, because you do have to ensure that it does what you intended to do. So you can't go and do try and error on the actual live system. So you have to go and test it on your own systems, validate that it works, then you go and deliver it. You are going to deliver it using the access you had gotten during the first stage of the kill chain. Then after that, then you execute your attack and your objectives. The objectives in the ICS world are usually grouped into 3. First one is loss of view or loss of control. Second one is denial of view or denial of control or denial of service. And finally, there is manipulation. So I'm briefly going to describe them. So for loss is the operators don't know what is happening with the systems. They have no control. they can't control the systems. So you've basically shut them off from the systems, and they have no idea what is happening. Next is denial. Denial is related to lots of you, but this could be denial of service. I think we are all aware of the traditional denial of service attempts, the DDoS, and so on and so forth. Denial of safety means that this is a key element because, as we said, in the physical world, safety is usually one of the very first key elements. So if you deny safety, you probably have caused massive damage to these systems. And this is going to be relevant during one of our case studies. So let me try to speed up a bit. Next is manipulation. Manipulation is now you can say, go manipulate power grids, turn off the systems, shut down a power grid, change the amount of chemicals you inject into our water plant, and so on and so forth. Then you can manipulate what the operator sees. So the technicians, the engineers think everything is okay. You've manipulated what they can actually see. So you can manipulate both the actual devices in the field and what the operators see. And you can also manipulate all these other devices, including the safety devices. Before we go into the case studies, let's quickly talk through the mitigations. The good thing with this is people from the IT world already know how to do these mitigations. So it's only the application that may be a bit different. So you have the old traditional network segmentation and monitoring, ensure that there are boundaries between different devices, security levels, control these levels, monitor what happens. Monitoring is probably the best defense you can ever have, both in the IT and the OT world. Just monitoring and detecting is usually one of the sure way of being secure. Of course, we have patch management. It's a bit tricky to implement, as we discussed. Access policies, who can view what, can anyone on the network access these devices, as is currently happening. An additional thing is physical security. Now, this one applies to places like remote areas, where people can go and have access to these devices. This could be, I think, for a proper case study, you could even talk like the BTSs that telecommunication companies use. These BTSs may be in remote areas. So physical security is important in that case. Otherwise, someone could just walk into that BTS control area and manipulate the devices, and the engineer probably, even if they knew, they would be too far away to do anything about it. Awareness, again, as these issues, sometimes just training the people, training your IT people to know that the OT world also deserves the attention they give to the normal IT world also matters. Training the engineers to know that the digital world now has more threats than the traditional threats of reliability and safety. Again, pen tests. I am sure almost no one in our local market has done a pen test on ICS systems, and we have them. We have power generation companies, we have water companies, but no one pen tests these devices. So pen tests and regular audits. Of course, incident response. How do you react to an incident when it happens? Because it will happen. So these are some of the mitigations that can be used. And as I said, very similar to what we see in the traditional networks. I'm going to quickly go through over the case studies. So these are real world events that have happened related to SES systems. The most famous one is Stuxnet. I think it's considered the very first APT targeted at ICS systems. So what it was, designed to do was to damage centrifuges being used for uranium enrichment in Iranian nuclear power plants. So what they did is they would manipulate both the centrifuges and the view. As we said, you can manipulate view and control. So they did both. So the operators couldn't detect that this was happening. So they led to a lot of damage of centrifuges and slowed down the Iranian nuclear power program for a very long time. Next came, I've skipped one famous one called Havex, a group called Dragonfly. So if you want to, you can read about it. Then there was Black Energy. Black Energy was targeted at Ukrainian power grid in December 2015. So a lot of I think it was in the capital city, went 6 hours without electricity. This system turned off the systems, then wiped the controllers. So the actual engineers couldn't even switch them on. They had to go physically to each and every system and try to switch them on. So that was a power blackout that affected a large area. Next came Industroya. Again, some of these were used in conjunction with other physical elements. Like this was during actual wars, so they would shut down the power grid while there was actual military action taking place on the ground. Industroya again was used against the Ukrainian power grid in 2016. Then we have one of the more recent ones called Triton. This one targeted safety systems in a Saudi Arabian petrochemical plant in 2017. It has been called the world's most murderous malware because what it did is the attackers gained access to the control systems. They could control, they could turn off whatever they wanted, but they didn't stop there. They ignored that and they went to the safety systems. The safety systems are the last line of defense. These are the systems that you can call them the emergency shutdown buttons. So let's say if the worst comes to worst, these are the systems that try to resume everything to normal or shut down the systems. So these attackers ignored the control they had and went directly for the safety systems. They were from Schneider Electronic. I think they were called Triconex. So it seems their whole purpose was actual distraction and safety. It wasn't the regular malwares that had been common then. The previous ones were various objectives: slow down the nuclear program, let's say shut down a power grid. These ones seemed as if they were actually meant to cause distraction, like explosions and so on and so forth. Luckily, they made some mistakes during this and they were detected. The mistakes they made is those safety systems malfunctioned some few times, so they called in people to audit them. Then they discovered this before these attackers had time to do what they were really planning to do. And it said that if they had succeeded, they probably have been release of hazardous gases into the atmosphere, probably explosions and so on and so forth. So I think I can quickly do a 5-minute demo before, as I see it's already 9:30. Then hopefully, let's see, okay. So I have a test bed that I have with me here. So I'm going to show you a sample control of this and how an attacker could also control a system remotely. So let's see. Can you see my video? I think you can. So I have a test bed here. So for this test bed, it has a Schneider electronic PLC, and I'm going to simulate the turning on and off of a generator. So the green button will be an indicator of on, and the red button will be an indicator of off. So I have a simple control interface. So this would be what your HMI would look like. So let me share the HMI panel. So as you can see, I have two buttons here. There's a button called generator off and generator on. So if I click on, the generator should turn on. Let's see, I hope you can see this on the system here. So now it's on. If I go back to the share, and turn it off now. If I go back to show you, it should now be on the red, as is shown here. So this is what a normal HMI or a normal operator would see. Then besides that, now let's say a network attacker is able to access the IP address of the Schneider controller. So there are various tools you can send packets with. I'm going to use a tool called Packet Sender, and I'm going to send them the same commands, but now I'm going to send crafted packets to it to do the same thing. So assume this could be a power grid control system, could be those centrifuges and so on and so forth. So let me share. So I like Packet Sender. It allows you to craft packets. You can craft them in hex, in ASCII, and save them. So I have some saved to turn on and off the generator in our case. This is using the Modbus protocol, which is very common. It's one of the most popular, and it's clear text protocol. So anyone on the network can sniff this traffic, and in most cases, you won't find authentication. They are trying to start adding authentication, but in most implementation, you won't even find authentication. So as of now, the generator is currently off. So let me turn it on. If I send a on, it should now have turned to the green state. Let's confirm. Yeah, it's on the green state. Then if we turn it off now, again, I have a packet I have pre-populated. So it should go back to the red state. Yeah, as is here. So I think since because of time, we won't go into more elaborate demo. I think that's enough. So let's go back into the presentation so that I can quickly wrap up. So I have a couple of resources here. I think I'll share the slides for anyone who wants them. And you can view a lot of these resources. SANS have a very good YouTube channel where they are trying to go through introductory content and taking you through the stages of learning. Then that's where I learned with a quote that says vulnerabilities will remain until tools exist to expose them. So we are now in the world where people are paying attention to these vulnerabilities in OT networks. So we are going to start seeing a lot of things of vulnerabilities being exposed, and hopefully there is going to be a change. So thank you, and I welcome any questions, hopefully just one.
Are there any questions? As mentioned earlier, you can raise your hand under the reactions option, or you can post it on the chat. Meanwhile, if you want to follow up with CK, you can find him on Twitter at IamCKN and his blog ckn.io. I hope that's correct, CK.
Yeah, that is correct.
Yes. Thankfully, we didn't lose people. We actually remained constant in numbers. And we want to thank everyone for attending. If anyone has a question, I know we're running out of time. CK has to leave the office. Okay. So we can end there, but if you have any questions, if you have any follow-ups, you can reach out to us or reach out to CK, and yes, we can carry the conversation forward. But yes, thank you, CK. Thank you for the session. And thank you for all our speakers, Matswish and Malusi and CK. This has been a very amazing Hackfest week 2. And we're grateful to have you. We're grateful that you presented. And that's it. See you all next week. Thanks, CK. Get home safe.
And good night.
Good night.